Hello, everybody. Welcome to the A7sIII podcast.
Hello.
Yet another fantastic episode on this fantastic day.
Indeed.
If you can have a fantastic day in 2020.
That's true. It's always up for debate.
Up for debate.
Yeah, just a moment ago we heard about a wildfire nearby us, so it's
I know, right? It's just never ends.
Par for the course for 2020. So today we are going to be going over some follow-up about the Apple M1 chip news last week. We're also going to go over the new FX6 announcement from Sony. And at the end, we're going to kind of round things out with a conversation about our experience with camera adventure bags and trying to figure out how to carry a lot of expensive camera equipment into the backcountry.
Yeah, for sure.
But we'll get started off here today by going over some of the new stuff that's come out about the M1 chip. Do you want to go over that?
Yeah, well, basically we theorized last week that it wasn't so much, we just didn't have a lot of information yet. Like we had what Apple told us, and it sounded amazing, but we didn't have nobody had used it in the real world. And now a week and a half later, turns out the M1 is crazy, crazy good, and people love it. And it's definitely the future of computing, probably. Indeed,
yeah.
It is. Geekbench has it for the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 chip. Excuse me. The single-core score is 1688, and the multi-core score is an incredible 7277. And just to put that in perspective, the multi-core score on the 16-inch MacBook Pro that's sitting on the desk right in here in front of me is 6867. So it's better than than this one. Oh, right. So we said last week that we would install macOS Big Sur. And I think we both did. Mm-hmm. And so far, my experience with it has been very positive overall. Mm-hmm. I mean, it looks amazing.
Yeah, it really does.
The design of it, it's very kind of fresh. There were some things that are like you have to kind of get used to. Everything is more spread out. We'll kind of put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything like the back and forth on Safari show previous page, that's in like a different place, and there's less information at the top of the screen, stuff like that.
Right.
On those toolbars,
but the new Safari is great.
Yeah, for sure.
It has it seems fast. I mean, there's been a couple of instances where it hasn't been working compatible with some, like for instance, in Squarespace, editing websites has not been great. And I know that Squarespace has said they prefer to be edited in Chrome, but sometimes I forget to switch over to Chrome when I'm going to do that and then do it in.
Yeah, Google Earth used to not even work in Safari.
I don't think it still does. I don't think it does now?
You can load up Google Earth in Safari.
Oh, nice.
Did that the other day. Of course, I mostly use the app, which I don't know if the app's just Google Earth Pro is just a portal over to a web thing. You know how a lot of those apps are they're kind of fancy ways to open up the app in the web. But I mostly use that. But I did try it just the other day because I hadn't actually installed it on the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, which I got just a couple months ago, but not saucy about that at all.
I have a question. If you had to do it over,
if I had to do it over right now, well, I think that I would probably have gone with the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 chip because I would want to save the $1,000 to buy a 16-inch M1 chip, whatever it's going to be, the 16-inch MacBook Pro that's coming with the Apple Silicon, probably in a year. So I probably would have gone for that. For those of you out there that maybe missed last week, the reason why I'd go for the MacBook Pro is because it does have the fan. And
Right.
I do a lot of things that's CPU intensive for a long period of time.
Right.
So I would need the fan, so I couldn't do the air, even though the air is actually basically identical, as is the...
Right. Well, and then I think you can add more storage. Don't quote me, but I think you can actually add more storage to the 13-inch MacBook Pro.
Oh, and it has better battery life too.
Oh, and yes, and better battery life. Yeah.
I'm not usually straining my battery life that much, but actually on that note, and coming back to macOS, I have had one kind of note of a glitch. I actually kind of have two notes for glitches I've noticed. The first one is that LG monitor I have at home. I talked about it. I might have talked about it a few times. I've noticed that it doesn't seem to be pushing enough power to the MacBook anymore.
Interesting. Just since you switched to Big Sur.
That is when I noticed it. I noticed that if you click on it, it'll have the logo like it's charging, but when you click on it, it will say insufficient power to charge or something, and the battery doesn't actually increase. It doesn't really drop either. So I'm not really running a power deficit, but I'm wondering if that's just a glitch with that LG monitor. You have the 27-inch. Have you noticed that at all?
No, I've had no issues. Really, like I said, the only thing that's popped up is editing Squarespace in the new Safari. That's literally been the only thing, and that I just switched over to Chrome and it was fine. So you can add the same amount of internal storage to the MacBook Air or the MacBook Pro.
Interesting. What is the max?
2 terabytes.
So can you do 5 terabytes on the 16-inch MacBook Pro?
You can do, I believe so. I will confirm that.
Yeah.
But we're doing a lot of Googling today, apparently.
Indeed. While he's looking at that, the other notation that I had was the conversations and messages are not seeming to update reliably.
Yeah, that's true. I have been noticing that there's been some, and I will agree with everyone that it's up to 8 terabytes.
Wow.
For $2,200, you can put 8 terabytes in a 16-inch MacBook Pro. So
that wouldn't be. I mean, that would be fun. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, I guess.
How much? So the total cost for that laptop is $5,000 then?
If you did just the top tier 16-inch MacBook Pro and didn't customize anything but the storage, it would be $5,000 even. If you maxed it out, let's just do a maxed out. A maxed out 16-inch MacBook Pro is $66.99. So
66. So basically,
after tax and everything, you're going to be looking at $7,000 probably after tax.
Oofta.
So
I mean, I could see it. At that point, it would start getting difficult. I mean, I don't know. Like the Mac Pro is such an interesting thing because I would love to have one, but it is a desktop, and it's hard to like buying a desktop no matter how powerful it is. I mean, you're still sometimes trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, which can be a problem. But of course, on the flip side to that, sometimes it I'm sure for some people in particular, it feels like they're trying to get a lot more power out of, like they're frustrated by the limited power you can actually get in a notebook. So that's always an interesting thing. And I feel like I've spent a lot of time riding that line between needing a laptop, needing a desktop, that kind of general area.
Right. So, there we go. That's kind of follow up we spent probably way too long on. So let's talk about the FX9.
Or FX6.
FX6. That keeps getting crossed in my head for some reason.
We're going to talk about the FX9 though as well, because it is important to notate. All right, so the new FX6 specs sheet is a 10.2 megapixel sensor.
Which is the same as the S3.
The same as the S3, except a different aspect ratio.
Well, yeah, they're just counting. I guess, is it actually a different aspect ratio in it, or is that just what they're counting?
The physical sensor's a different size.
Okay.
So it's 16 by 9, so that's where the 2 megapixels is going, is the top and the bottom's getting cut off. But if you shoot video, which you probably do if you own an S3, it doesn't change anything because I don't even think you can shoot stills on the FX9. That'd be weird.
That would be weird.
So you can shoot full frame 10-bit 422 DCI 4K up to 120 frames per second.
Very nice.
I will notate a weird quirk. 4K 24p in all modes does not have autofocus, but 23.936, the standard, does of course have full autofocus, as does 60 and 120.
Weird.
But autofocus is only in those 3 frame rates. So you only have autofocus in 23.96 or whatever it is. You have it in 60 and you have it in 120. You can pick pretty much any frame rate in there, but only those 3 are going to give you autofocus in
Interesting.
4K. The base ISOs are, and this time they're saying there's 2 dual, even though the research seems to show that they basically perform the same as the A7S3. You have 800 as your low end, 12,800 on the high end. I believe that's the testing seems to show that's about the same.
Right, that makes sense.
You've got the Bion's XR processor, which should be giving you 4 times more performance than what you saw out of the FS5, which is what this camera is actually replacing, is the FS5 Mark II. It's got the very similar body and everything else, even though it's a different sensor size because it is full frame. It's got the same card. It's got the same memory card
as the S3.
So you can do the CF Express Type A cards or dual SD cards. It's got S-Log3 and S-Cinetone. It's got a variable ND built in, high speed 4D AF system, so the same AF that's in the S3.
No, I heard that. I thought it was the same as the FX9. It's not the same as in the S3.
I think that they're very comparable, but maybe it is slightly different.
I feel like because I listened to the Gerald Undone video, and like I was also trying to feed Ren at the same time, my daughter Ren. So I don't know how detailed I was, but it's not. I think he was saying that the S3's autofocus is better. It seems better than the FX6 and the FX9, both.
All right.
So interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And also, he also talked about that the touchscreen interface is like going back to the old Sony style of it's there, but it's not very functional.
It's got some weird things. I think that you have to press, like to focus select, you have to press some weird button combination and then you can move the focus point around. There's a good chance that they'll fix that in firmware because that's just dumb.
Right.
And that was the last thing on my quick spec list was it had an LCD touchscreen that came in the box. So where this is fitting in the lineup is you have the FX9 above it, you have the S3 below it, but exactly how it lands is weird. Like shooting RAW on the FX6 is a lot easier. You can just do it with a Ninja V. Whereas with the FX9, I think you need like a $5,000 giant thing you mount on the back of it. There's a lot of details to it that almost feel like it's not an upgrade to the FX9, but they definitely feature packed the FX6 for sure. We can go over some more of the details. It matches the FX9's video capture in 4K 60.
Okay.
It has the same S-Cinetone, S-Log, all the HLG gammas. It outputs 16-bit RAW like the FX9. It offers the same ND options. It has 2-channel XLR audio inputs. Well, there's actually a note you made to me the other day that really surprised me about the audio inputs on it.
That they're only in the handle.
Yeah, they're only in the handle.
That's very odd.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they made the super compact body, but to really input audio, you have to put the handle, which makes it bigger. So.
And that just, I'm not going to say that that's a deal breaker from my perspective, because I'm I'm not really in the market for this camera, but I'm a prospective buyer over the next couple of years of these kind of cine high-end video cameras.
The camcorder, yeah.
And that's really annoying because trying to get the handle in a backpack on top of the camera, it really hurts let's say the ease of use, like carrying it around and traveling with it.
Right. There has to have been some issue, and I don't know why they didn't just put a 3.5 on the body. Like, I understand not putting an XLR. Like, that takes up a lot of space, but why not just put a 3.5 on the body so you could just plug in any,
And it's a weird usability comparison to the C70 because the C70 has one mini XLR on the camera and a 3.5 mil. So it has two audio inputs on the camera, and then it also has another one in the grip itself. So basically, the biggest thing that it also hurts it on, not just the easy to move it around and stuff like that. The other big thing it does is it makes it harder to capture audio when you're on a gimbal because the top handle and then the idea of using an extra mic on top of that just adds a lot of weight in a weird and kind of awkward spot.
And I think you could, in theory, there is a little like built-in camera mic, right? That like's in any camera on the body. That's, you would never use for production, but you could use it as reference audio to then externally record. So like, there's an option.
There's workarounds.
There's workarounds, but it feels a little inexcusable that they couldn't have just put a 3.5 just in the body and not have made this an issue at all. But anyway, I mean, that may be us just looking at it from our use case scenario, but yeah. No, it's an interesting camera. It is, for being so similar to the S3, it is significantly more expensive. It is
$6,000 basically, $59.98.
Right, which is $2,500 more than the S3, and for that you're getting a camcorder body. You're getting Cinetone, so S-Cinetone. You're getting it's just like the list is not that long compared to the getting
built-in
S3.
variable ND's a big deal.
That's true. That is a big deal.
Are those worth? You're losing stuff though too. You have to factor in that you are losing the IBIS that's in the S3, which you're probably making that trade-off for the variable ND, although that's unclear. There's a chance that Sony just knows that big productions tend to put their cameras on tripods and gimbals and stuff, and doesn't want to deal with the drama that could be added by a camcorder. I think that it does come down to the body style is really where you're spending most of that money. You're getting it in a professional camcorder body, which is easier to use on professional sets.
Right. Yeah. You're getting a lot more buttons and cause you get shutter angle too. You get things like that. Which, that's nice, Yeah.
I mean, and it's just like you can, instead of looking at ISO, you can switch it over to gain, which is just, that's like a cinema thing they do. Because that's what ISO really kind of is.
Right. Yeah.
And that sounds silly as like a thing to point out, but if you're dealing with a cinema world where everyone's really used to shutter angle and used to calling ISO gain and used to having a camera with NDs and used to having a camera with multiple audio inputs and so on and so forth, $2,500 is nothing. They won't even think about that.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you I want you to sort of build an argument for why, as like a YouTube creator, you'd buy the FX6 and why maybe you wouldn't.
I don't know that I can come up with an argument for there's, as a YouTube creator, like the S3 makes way more sense. I don't think there's an argument for. You have more user-friendly interface. It's cheaper. There's so many accessories and everything else that goes with it. it's more portable. You can vlog with it. Like you can't really vlog with the FX6. Not really. I mean, I guess you could technically if you really, really wanted to, but like I can't come up with an argument for like.
The argument I would actually come up with is a situation like, not that we're buying an FX6. This shooting situation would be probably a better experience with an FX6. You have your camera on a tripod, so the size doesn't really matter. You have two XLR ends, so we could just literally take these mics and plug them into the camera as opposed to having an external recording source. So that would be one example. And then, of course, also if you do professional work on the side, you're not just a YouTuber. There is an advantage to just, in some ways, having a bigger camera. It lets you charge more and look more professional.
Yeah, I guess I can see it. I'm not very convinced by it, though. Like, I guess the two XLR inputs would be nice, but like, I also don't mind this. The Rodecaster is in a lot of ways probably better than that, recording straight to the camera. What we're actually getting at the end of the day with it. So, yes, you can, I guess I can see where you're coming from, but that's not where I would go with it. I still would advise it. And what's interesting is that I could see the C70, even though it's not full frame, I see more of an argument for that for a YouTube creator. For one thing, the form factor is more traditional, DSLR, mirrorless. Like it has it's a chunky, but
about 3.5 pounds, I think.
Yeah. No, it's chunky, but it's kind of an in between, and I think that I can see more of an argument for that, as far as for a YouTube creator. And then also, I mean, I guess like look what it's competing against, like the R5. If you're just doing video, if you're looking at the C70 versus the R5, the C70 probably makes more sense unless you need 8K. Or you really need full frame, but there's even an option to work around that with that speed boost adapter that basically converts over a lens into full frame onto an APS-C sensor. So
yeah, and that's the first time we've seen a main camera brand produce a speed booster, which is interesting.
Yeah,
and maybe one of the only times we actually see them do that, because it seems like they're all getting very centralized on full frame being their main
that
deal.
Is a discussion we should have at some point as to, like, there's actually been rumors this week that Canon is working on an APS for RF body, an APS-C RF body, but it does seem like a full frame is kind of the path forward for pro and semi-pro cameras, and even to some degree enthusiast cameras.
Well, I think that the Z5, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Z5, like some of these cameras, Z5, Canon RP, the Sony, I mean, the Sony's cheapest full frame camera, they didn't really make it super, super cheap, but
the A7sIII,
particularly the Z5 and the RP, like they're gonna be $500 cameras soon, and that's still a little. I feel like about $500 is what most people are going to spend anyway,
right?
And you're just spending a couple hundred more to get full frame. So I actually could see there being a place for a professional APS-C RF camera.
Right. Well, and for video, because it's Super 35, which is like a kind of a standard format and aspect ratio for video. It's very interesting. It's like in some ways in video circles, Super 35 is as professional as full frame.
Well, if they put just saying, if they gave me an RF camera that has 4K 120 in it, whether it's APS-C or not, that's, let's say, around $2,000. I'm going to be very interested in that, because it is easier to handle stuff like heat and everything else.
Right, because the sensor's smaller. It's,
Yeah, it's smaller, and maybe you could get that stabilized too, which would be awesome.
Right.
You could get some features in there that I would really be responsive to. But I think that the kind of to round out the FX6 conversation is to kind of do a direct comparison between it and the C70 spec sheet wise. The main big difference between these cameras is going to be the price. There's a $500 difference. The C70 is $54.99. The FX6 is $59.98. And the other difference is going to be full frame. You get full frame with the FX6. And
Right.
I would say
You also get full size XLR.
and you also get raw out. So these are
That's
these are
true.
those are three big features. The features I would say that the C70 can come back with is kind of what you were saying. It's really not, it's the first time we've seen and this is what's exciting about the C70 to me.
Right.
It is I don't know exactly how to say this. Finally somebody took a stills camera and made all the changes you'd want to it for video, as opposed to making a video camera in a stills body.
Right.
They made it slightly bigger. They put in the built-in NDs. They put in mini XLRs, so you can use bigger mics with, like we're using right now. You can use large
Right.
condenser microphones, professional audio stuff. And they maintained some of the stuff you expect from a C-line camera. And that morph is something I've been sort of watching for a long time. The GH5 series was kind of dancing around doing it. The S3 series is dancing around doing it. But in the end, they're really just stills cameras with modifications on them. And the C70
Right. Stills
is the
design.
Stills
They're
design.
video. They really are video cameras, but the design of them and the way that you use them is still more stills than video.
Well, yeah, and they would cram stuff in them, like the GH5 has a 20 megapixel sensor, which maybe helps and hurts the video performance. I mean, all these cameras we're talking about right now, say what you will about downsampling, these are professional video cameras made for videographers, and they all have near 1-to-1 pixel readout.
With the sensors, yeah.
With barely any downsampling. And that seems to be a consistent theme continuing forward, with the exception of the FX9. I think the FX9 does shoot 6K and does downsample 6K as well. But with the C70, what you have is a camera that's taking what we've learned from the DSLR video revolution and what videographers have been using and loving since they started making digital camcorders.
Right.
With the buttons and the size and the built-in NDs and all of that, and combining them together. And in that way, the FX6 and the C70, even though they're priced similarly and the specs are very similar, I don't actually think that they're very well comparable, because one seems like it's built for the one-man band that needs to go out and get some footage, and the other one seems like a camera for productions, even though everything else seems kind of similar when you look at the physical casing that it's in.
Right.
You really see that difference.
Right. And I also think that that the C70 also has the full-on dual pixel autofocus, whereas the FX6 has not quite Sony's best autofocus. And I'd be interested as to why. It seems kind of touchy, the autofocus with it just in general, because for reasons I don't feel like I understand. But because I understand a lot about video, but I stills is still my primary focus. But I understand some, but some of the stuff I don't track I've been tracking them more, but I haven't historically tracked all the different cine cameras. Like the FX9, I knew it existed, but I didn't really know what made it amazing versus whatever.
Well, I think that to kind of end off with the FX9, the FX6 causes problems with the FX9. It really does, because what is amazing about it is a little bit up in the air now, I feel like.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like that. Looking at them compared, like it's I don't see what the FX9 price is 11,000.
It's 11,000, so it's a lot more
It's a
expensive.
lot more expensive, and it's also a lot larger. But
Now it is made for even another level of that production set, and I'm sure it has tons of little nuts and bolts. If you could get somebody in here that owns one, they could explain to you why. I'm sure there's videos on YouTube that do. But for your everyday creator, it's completely, I don't know why you'd even really look at it.
Why you'd even look at it. Yeah, no joke. Whereas the C70, honestly, like the S3 is probably like if you're a YouTube creator starting out for video and that's kind of what you're jumping into, the S3 is probably your best option right now. You can make arguments for the R5, you could make arguments, but it's still probably the best option. The C70 is in that argument for kind of a next step up. Although I think you probably would want to be doing some production work to really make that extra, in that case, $2,000 worth it.
I think it also comes down in that way, how much are you using the camera? How much are you having to either rely on workarounds, like recording externally or not being able to shoot redundant audio? And, how much are you dealing with external ND drama, which there definitely is external ND drama.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Anything from color casts to weird flares to whatever, even when you buy the top of the line. So I think that a lot of it comes down to how much are you making off the camera financially? Because if you're making a lot, then, in this case, what is that, $2,000? Isn't that big of a deal necessarily?
Right.
If you're not making anything off your camera, $2,000 is a huge deal.
Right.
It's almost, you've definitely done some work to free up $3,500 if you're not making any money off your camera to begin with.
Right.
So I think that's a really interesting question. Probably comes down to more which ecosystem you're already in than we like to think it does.
Well, and then, you get on YouTube lately and everybody's just switching around like crazy. And, we've done our fair share of switching around this year too, but it's just kind of gone bonkers with like people buying R5s and then switching to S3s and then some people switching to C70s from the S3 and like it's just kind of gone crazy with all that.
There's actually a really excellent video. I think maybe I won't call out the name because I can't think of it right now, but I'll link it in the description. I'll find it for you. But he talks about why YouTubers switch cameras, and it's that they actually make money off of switching because you can make videos about switching, and that can oftentimes at least make up a lot of the difference, especially if you have equipment to sell to make up a lot of the price.
Right.
So I think that's something you do have to keep in mind. If you can make videos for an audience about new cameras and that's something they like, that's something you're incentivized to do, which I don't actually think is a bad thing. I just think it can definitely make this weird thing where if you're out of that market, switching is this huge, difficult, costly thing to do. So you really have to be convinced to do it, or you should be really convinced to do it. Whereas for someone that has an audience to sort of support their switching, it can turn into, well, I just want to see what that's like. And, you're going to make money or break even. It doesn't matter as much.
Right. That's, it's very true. And it, and they definitely, the switching videos get a lot of, people really pay attention, and sometimes there's some weird logic stuff that happens. And I think it's also important, like when you're looking at YouTube for a lot of your information, like there's no vetting going on with YouTube videos. Like, even if you're watching us right now, no one's vetting we're not a press, we're not
there's no editor being like, are these guys saying anything
accurate?
correctly?
We're just recording this and then putting it up on YouTube. So, and when you do that, you get a lot of things like bias, and then you're also you're dealing with people's opinions and decisions, and they're just, most of the time they're just an individual who's built a following. So, there's no, the backing it up, you need to kind of look at it that way, if your friend switched, that you knew personally, you would look at it a different way than, a Consumer Reports or something telling you to switch, and YouTubers kind of fall somewhere in between. They might have a lot of experience with a lot of different things, but they're still just an individual with an opinion and, different use cases and all that stuff.
Yeah, and those opinions can be very valuable to helping you make smart decisions. But I think it's also important to remember, I've had this thought in my head of like specs are in a different hierarchy for different creators. And I think sometimes people, as opposed to really trying to sort through what is the most important thing, is it usability? Is it autofocus? Is it resolution? Is it lenses that I can afford to buy for this camera, or sharpness, or these different things?
Right.
What is that hierarchy? And making sure that you're not letting other people switch it around, like letting other people put 4K at the top of your list when that doesn't matter, or letting other people put primes and shallow depth of field at the top of your list when maybe that isn't actually the direction you want to go.
Right.
So to make sure you're deciding, I want to optimize for X, Y, or Z. I'm not necessarily letting other people put, a great example of this is raw video at the top of your list.
Right. Raw video is really hard to use, and you don't need it. I guess you probably don't need it as often as maybe you'd think. It just, the uses are way different. I think a lot of people with raw video, and honestly, tying it into the YouTuber thing, this is the way a lot of YouTubers treat it, is that it's the same as raw photos. Like, well, of course you're going to shoot raw photos, so why wouldn't you want to shoot raw video? And you should talk to your computer about that. And just there are definitely times where raw video is fantastic. But it's not nearly as often as raw photos. In my opinion, there's never a time when a photo is worse off being in RAW versus JPEG. There are some people who swear by shooting their JPEGs because they like to save space or whatever. But generally speaking, a photo is going to come out better RAW than JPEG. It just is. And video is not necessarily the same thing. You have to kind of be in a situation where RAW is really utilized in order for it to be worth it. But it's really fun to talk about how this camera shoots RAW and this one doesn't, and it just makes it sound like, wow, it would be like if the 6D, shot only JPEGs and the 5D shot RAW, that would be, it's not that difference. The difference is not that.
Well, and when you say it's not the same, you mean that very literally. There's not as much information in most video RAW files as there is in most stills RAW files.
Right.
So when someone talks about their Red camera shooting RAW, that's extremely close to what your stills camera shoots RAW photos. It's called Cinema DNG. It's not exactly DNGs, but it's very, very close. I'll let other people that are a little bit more knowledgeable on that say, but anything from Blackmagic RAW to ProRes RAW to all these different things, they're basically steps toward a true raw video future that I think is coming. But they still are compressed. And some of them, I won't get super into the weeds because it's extremely confusing. I would have to do research to do a video on it. But, ProRes RAW on the Z6 is not the same as ProRes RAW on the S1H. They have different advantages and disadvantages, and they're really good with color, and that one's really good with dynamic range, but they're not opening up the full breadth. So RAW is just generally raw video is just an area that's just rife to get confused in.
Right. Yes, it is. Yeah. And again, you know, like I'm not an expert in it. I wouldn't necessarily listen to all my advice about raw video, but I probably know as much as a lot of people who've made videos about raw video on YouTube. And so, you know, that's something to keep in mind is that, you know, like, where is this person coming from? You know, they're super ramped about this feature. And it does feel like it's starting to be like, I felt like on YouTube a few years ago, everyone was negative Nancy about every new camera. Like every new camera just was held to the standard that it just couldn't live up to. And I feel like that's kind of flipped to now where everything new, every new thing is the best thing ever and is, you know, worth, you know, selling the farm to switch to. And I'm not quite sure why we had that culture shift. I think part of it is that the camera brands are definitely more involved. And, you know, like, I'm not going to start a conspiracy theory about who's being paid what, because that's what comment sections are for. And, you know, that's not what podcasts are for. But I do feel like brands are more involved. They're more hands-on with the YouTube community than ever before. And I feel like, you know, a couple of years ago we had, you know, where they were sending people on trips and stuff. And I feel like that was a little in less taste. But now, you know, like, you know, like look at the ZV-1. Was it ZV-1, the little compact Sony thing? ZV-1, yeah. Earlier this year. Like, Sony made sure that was in the hands of so many YouTubers. And the day they announced it, there was so many videos on YouTube about what it was like, you know? And, you know, so it's a wave of information that in some ways Sony created, you know, in so much as that they sent out all those ZV-1s early, right? And, you know, the S3, the R5 to some degree, I think the R5 was a little less so. It kind of took a while for actual information on the R5 to really get out there. They were definitely like Peter McKinnon, but Peter McKinnon, he even said he was sponsored by
Well, they had him
Canon.
do the launch video.
They had him do the launch video. Which in some ways, as kind of annoyed by that as I was, it's also, you know, it is somewhat above board, you know? It's like, well, I did this for Canon. I got hired by Canon to do it. And they, you know, he didn't have to do a super, like a 5-minute intro on like how they acquired the camera and how what they're about to say is unbiased. And it's not that I don't believe them. I just think that like an environment is being created by the brands, irregardless of how biased or unbiased you claim to be as a YouTube creator.
Well, and there's still a selection bias towards I want to own the best camera, period. Not I want to own the best camera for me.
That's true.
So many things go into the best camera for you. Anything from the budget to how much video versus stills you do to exactly what you photograph and exactly what you do shoot video of.
Right.
The perfect camera for you, or the best, let's not say perfect, let's say the best camera for you on the market is almost certainly different than the person next to you. And you may not even own the perfect camera for you, but it's important to remember that Peter McKinnon saying he found the best camera for him,
right?
It doesn't make it the best camera for you.
Right. Well, and I'm not really trying to say that sponsorships are all bad, and I don't think it's all bad that Sony is sending out cameras super early, where we have all of these FX6 videos on YouTube. You know, the day that Sony announces that there's so many of them, and I don't think that's bad. I just think it's important to be aware of it. Just, you know, like, well, you know, Sony, all these videos exist because Sony sent out these cameras, right? Well, what does that mean, you know? And, you know, it means that Sony sells cameras because, I mean, really where it leads to is that Sony sells cameras because of YouTube videos. Canon sells cameras because of YouTube videos. That's probably how the community, the photography community is definitely living on YouTube right now, more so than anywhere else, I feel like. And And so they kind of know that. So, it's important just to remember the environment that you're hearing all of these things from. And like, as you zoom out, you can see how it's affecting, that environment's being affected by all of a sudden, every new camera that comes out is best thing ever, super, amazing, and in flaws get upplayed and downplayed to some degree. But I think overall, like, for instance, a flaw that was upplayed is the overheating on the R5, It was kind of made out to be this huge thing. And Canon has also worked on it to some degree.
Well, it also, the narrative gets locked and the cameras themselves don't. So even if someday the R5 doesn't overheat at all, there will be 2 videos that are about that entire thing, and then 20 videos that were made when the R5 was brand new and it overheated. So there's this information. It basically, the idea of the camera gets locked into how it was when it was launched. And I think that's an interesting thing, because even the narrative about it versus its competition changes. So a camera can go from top dog to, actually not that great. But the videos that were produced when it came out, they don't talk about these cameras because they weren't out yet. Like, there's a lot of, it's important to use a kind of an aggregate of information when you're making purchasing decisions, as opposed to what this one person said at this one time.
Right. And I don't think it's bad information. I don't think that you're getting bad information from a YouTuber who got sent a camera early. I don't think it's bad information. I think it's good information. I just think it's important that when there is this amount of information, because really what's happening is that before we purchase a camera or do whatever with a camera, we can get more information about it than ever before. Well, and really this applies to anything that you are interested in purchasing. There's probably a YouTube video about it somewhere. There's probably, there might be even 10 YouTube videos about it. And so, but it's important to, when you're ingesting that information, to think about like where it's coming from, why it's coming from, and, all of that. And do it in a more intelligent way than just like, oh, this person's being paid off. Because I actually don't think that's happening very often. I have never, maybe there's been a few times I've been suspicious that I'm like, okay, this smells funny, but certainly not as often as people accuse, everybody of it. Like the big YouTubers, Tony Northrup, Jared Polin, everybody gets accused of being a sellout for, blah, blah, blah brand.
Well, I think it's important to remember that people can have extreme opinions without actually, people can have really extreme opinions about stuff without actually being paid to hold those opinions about them. So if somebody really doesn't like Nikon, there's a decent chance that they just really don't like Nikon, and the bias is probably more likely that they just for some reason really don't like it, as opposed to they're getting paid by Sony to hate Nikon.
Right.
Like, I feel like people jump to that because I think it's almost more of a weird trend to hold that opinion about people than it's the most likely reason why someone might be biased.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's an easy way to attack an opinion either you don't like, or we talked about this in the brand loyalty video where it's prevalent in just our culture in general right now. People are believing what they want to believe, and then they find the information that they
that supports their
opinion, or they just create new information, or they just believe what they want to believe and then just tell everybody they're wrong based with no factual basis at all. Like, we're recording this in late 2020, and I think anybody can kind of relate to that and think about some examples in the larger world where this is happening.
Indeed.
And I think it's important to try to rise above that and not just accuse these YouTubers and all these reviews of doing anything nefarious. Yeah. But at the same time, you need to, keep in mind, why this review, how this review came to be, and, kind of think about, how all of it relates to each other in your decision making,
Indeed. All right. Do we want to move on to our next topic?
I suppose we should. I guess we've been going on. This is going to be a long one. So
Indeed. So the last topic on today is we're going to talk about camera adventure backpacks and versus climbing backpacks, and I kind of like to start
standard outdoor backpacks.
Yeah, outdoor backpacks. Would kind of like to start this conversation by asking kind of your journey, maybe not backpack to backpack, but your journey deciding to purchase.
Well, I mean, I guess really what it comes down to is like there are advantages and disadvantages to a backpack being designed to carry a camera, and designed just to being able to carry everything, right? And I just have there's trade-offs, and what I'm struggling with right now is figuring out like for a long time I used just standard, outdoor backpacks, and then just kind of various ways that I carried my camera in there. And then, I used brands like f-stop and Shimoda, which are, camera, the bags are designed to carry cameras with, internal camera cubes and all that stuff.
Back access
and all that kind of thing. And there's definitely advantages to being able to, just unzip the back panel and all your stuff's there. And it can be more protected, in some ways, but I've not found those bags. First off, they tend to always be heavy. They don't tend to take some of the ethos of like an outdoor backpack into account as much as I think maybe they should. They tend to be very heavy, just the bag itself. Then you have to put the insert in there, which adds weight. And so you just put the camera equipment and the bag itself and you're already, very heavy. Whereas other backpacks, the materials are lighter. They're designed to carry everything, the whole, they're less, it's about getting the stuff out quickly and more at carrying on your back comfortably. So, I think it's kind of that juxtaposition of it that's kind of tricky. They've yet to, there's yet a camera backpack that I've found that just, it carries like I still feel like when I'm hauling it over the miles that I'm like, this is a camera backpack. It still kind of feels like a camera backpack. They're boxier, they're heavier. That's kind of what they are. That's the nature of it, I guess.
I suppose the question is it really the camera backpack's design that's the problem? Or is it just the fact that carrying lots of heavy camera equipment just is a problem?
I think it's both. I kind of wish that camera backpack manufacturers would take a step back from making sure that the camera stuff is all squared away and incorporate more of, like I said, the ethos of a backcountry backpack. Lightweight, very comfortable, and then also not focus so much on like how comfortable the camera area is and everything else. For instance, on both f-stop and Shimoda, if you're going to use a water bladder, you have to put it on the pocket on the front of, and if you're carrying 2 to 3 liters of water, it's the heaviest single item in your backpack, and it's hanging off of the front of your backpack.
So it's basically very far away from your
It's
back.
very far away from your spine. And like, I guess the accumulation of your camera gear is heavier, right? But it's also not, it's also more spread out just by its very nature, unless, you know, you're carrying a 200 to 600 or something, you know. Yeah, I mean, I guess you can create a scenario where a single item is heavier, right? But still, 2 to 3 liters of water is very heavy, and it's very far from your back. And like, I don't have an obvious solution to that, other than that when I just stick my camera in my backpack and then the water is right next to my back, that tends to ride better. Like I have a Black Diamond climbing pack that's like, I think it's like 24 liters maybe. And, you know, I've climbed a lot of 14ers in it, and the water is right next to my back, and then the camera is in it. Just normally it's in like one of those shoulder bags or whatever. There's been various things that I've carried it in, and that is more comfortable weight wise. You know, it feels like overall everything's closer to your back. So, you know, it'd be nice if they were, and honestly, part of it is that they're selling to photographers, and the quote unquote Kickstarter videos need to talk about how good it is at carrying camera gear. And then they can talk a little bit about like, oh yeah, it will also carry all this other gear. And I'm like, all that other gear is really important when you're out. Like, you know,
I mean, I guess the question is what percentage of their buyers are taking it a mile or less from their car, and what percentage of their buyers are actually putting in 12-mile days?
That would be fascinating to know, is how many people buy like f-stop. I mean, I know that a lot of people who buy f-stop bags and stuff, like you see them. I haven't seen like in a documentary or whatever somebody using a Shimoda bag yet, but I've definitely seen people using f-stop bags. There's the one about Kilimanjaro that we watched, the Ice on Kilimanjaro, which is very good. Probably should check that out. But there's 2 guys in that video, in that film, carrying f-stop bags. So it definitely happens, right? And there's a use case for it. But at the same time, I think a lot of people like that, they just wind up sticking their cameras in their regular outdoor bags. So I don't, the thing is that we're talking about this. I don't know that I have a great solution.
Well, I think that you've touched on a couple things that could be solutions, though. I think that one thing is that I think that keeping stuff safe inside the bag is their number one thrust a lot of the time. So it's like the bag is waterproof, the bag is robust.
Right.
There's lots of padding around the camera gear. And I feel like you could actually make an argument for having the camera gear protected and wherever they are, like they almost always, you would always want it in a case that's got padding on the sides and stuff.
Right. No, I've never just wrapped it in a
regardless.
jacket before.
Exactly. And even then, technically speaking, it's pretty padded, you know?
Right. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So like focus on that. But then beyond that, you don't actually need the exterior materials of the bag to be as robust as they are. I think that something they're very focused on is when you put the bag on, it's extremely comfortable. That's where the heavy structure inside the bag and everything else kind of comes from. Because when you put on a bullet pack that has no metal structure to it at all,
Right.
it's just the straps that strap it to you, and then you can strap everything else down. When you first put a backpack like that on, it can feel kind of like it's bulging into your back.
That's
Not
true.
that comfortable. But as you hike, what's in the bag, because it's, and you know, they're not really expecting you to have camera lenses and stuff, expecting it to be jackets and food, and you know, maybe you're lashing to the outside of the bag, snowshoes or an ice axe or something.
Right.
You can get to this really comfortable situation. I think a huge problem with camera bags is that the actual act of carrying cameras comfortably is hard. And it's
just
definitely
in
hard.
general.
And every time you add a lens or a microphone or really anything you need, a second camera, anything you might want, a light. Right. You are adding some sort of variable that, is not a lot of people have the need to carry that, which is part of the problem. We can only have so many companies that are trying to pursue that. But, fragile, heavy things are just not going to be easy to take into the mountains or the desert or wherever.
So you feel like part of me is just kind of resigned to that, I'll be dealing with it to some degree. I don't know that there's a perfect design. I'm sure that, it's obviously something a lot of people have taken a crack at. And again, I do feel like part of me wishes that I think what I'm seeing right now with a lot of the adventure camera bags is that they start with a camera bag and then make it more like a adventure backpack. And what I would like to see is them start with an adventure backpack and try to make it more of a camera bag. I think that some of the systems would you'd adjust some of the systems and the way that it rides and not so boxy and not so heavy. Use materials like you said. The only thing that really needs to be waterproof is although you can make lightweight waterproof, like Arc'teryx makes some bags that are waterproof that are very light.
Waterproof may be the wrong word. It may be more. It seems like they want to make them rip proof.
Yeah, or just and it's not that I've really so right now I'm primarily using the Shimoda Action X.
The brand new system.
It's a brand new system. About a year old now. So fairly new, and overall I really like them. But yesterday we went on a long hike, and I used the 30-liter version, so the smallest version. I had a one body, 2 lenses, and all my other stuff. And I'm like, this is heavier and less comfortable than it needs to be for what I'm carrying. And I just kept having that thought all day. I'm just like, because we went 12 miles, we went 4,500 feet of gain, in the mountains. And I just kept thinking, I'm like, I'm not carrying that much. I'm really not. And this is kind of heavy. This is kind of awkward. And it just didn't feel like it needed to be for, that far. And, if you go for a 1 mile, 2 mile hike, I probably wouldn't have noticed it for one thing. I wouldn't have even thought about it. But, after I've gone that far and that steep, it definitely stood out. So, and I used the camera over the summer and, I kind of, the bag over the summer and, some days were better than others depending on kind of what was in it. But,
I do think that balance issues, become a lot more real with the camera bags. I think that's part of the reason why over the course of a day, I'll dive into more why I think it's such a problem. But over the course of the day, the fact that your camera bag is off balance, like maybe it's kind of a little bit more heavy towards the back of the pack on one side because you have a tripod there or something else, that's going to cause it to be out of balance, which could cause a hip to get sore or your other shoulder to get sore or the shoulder on that side to get a little tired. And I think that specifically these... the camera backpacks offer this, let's say, unique opportunities for giant empty cavities to be in your bag where there's just nothing there. I carry my camera on the outside a ton, and because of that, I'll have a spot in the bag for the camera, but there's nothing there. So randomly at the bottom of the pack or in the middle of the pack, there's just this giant space,
this giant hole
with nothing in it for the whole day. But I want it there because I want to be able to put the camera away if it rains or if I'm doing, more technical moves or something. I want to be able to put the camera away in the bag. So that can cause an imbalance if the camera insert is not perfectly positioned to be well balanced as well as accessible. And then I think that the one huge thing I would tell them to consider rethinking is I think that the zipper to open up the camera bag should actually be on the back of the bag. So as opposed to it being up against your back, that's where the suspension and the water should probably go. And the quick access part of the bag should be the back.
Right. I've definitely seen a few bags like that, but again, they're not really full on hiking bags. But I definitely think that is possible.
Or it's just something they
I'm
haven't
starting to
tried.
wonder though is just by the nature of it, because like you talk about them being the empty spaces, but something that happens with a regular hiking bag or a climbing bag, right, is that if something's not in it, that air, the bag kind of moves in on itself and gets naturally smaller. Whereas that is not the case with the camera bag, like you said, because everything's so divided up. You have this area of the bag is for cameras, this area of the bag is for your jackets, and then you have a pocket on the front for your water and whatever else, and then your tripod's tracked to the side, and then you stick food in wherever. But if you make it all where it's like one space, you take something out and it compacts in on itself. And so you're actually carrying less on your back, mass wise, or area wise, I guess. I don't mean mass, I mean area.
And the weight drops lower to your hips.
Exactly. It drops lower. So, and I think that like the big issue though, with just using a regular hiking bag is access. It just like, if everything's all in one pocket, all piled together, that gets hard. And especially if you want to take, the shot in a hurry, either you need to have the camera already out, which is one solution. That's normally what you do, is you kind of have yours out all the time. Whereas I tend to put mine away and take it out and put it away and take it out. So anyway, I think, we're kind of going ring around the rosy a little bit, but because, that's kind of the nature of it. I would be interesting. I would love to see, I'll probably always be on a quest to some degree, but I would just love, like, if someone from one of these adventure camera bag videos is listening, I would love to see what they would do if they started out with a more standard, like an idea would be is to take like one of a roll top climbing type bag, right? Everything goes in and out of the top, that's very standard for like a climbing backpack or a mountaineering backpack, is that everything goes in and out of the top. There's no pockets on the sides, which is a failure point, and the zippers add weight and all of this other stuff. But what if inside you could do some dividing, like just had an area where you could stick like a camera case, a camera case or something along those lines, and then have another area where you could stick, your clothes or whatever. But like you take the camera case out and it doesn't really affect the structure of the bag other than to make it smaller, Like you said, you don't have this giant empty hole, but there's some ability to organize in there. And you'd also know where you were reaching for in your bag. So I'm kind of picturing like a cloth piece like going down the middle or something. And then on one side you could stick your camera bag thing. The other side you could stick your clothes and everything, and then the water could go right next to your bag, your back. I mean, I don't know. Could it work? Maybe, but
it could. I think that one issue you could run into is the camera gear is going to weigh a lot more than your jackets.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely issues that you're going to run into, but
yeah, I think that it's just such a weird, the access problem. It's been a while since we actually had a major access problem because we've both been using camera bags for 2 years, basically.
Yeah, 2-3
mountains.
years, yeah.
But I remember having a lot of situations where you're trying to get your camera out and there's straps getting stuck on stuff and jackets being pulled out with the camera bag and all this drama. So that's where I think you can turn into not quite a dilemma necessarily, but this weird thing where you're trying to choose between the moment when you're actually capturing stuff, that experience, versus the moment when you're slogging on the trail, which one of those is more important. You're first to kind of pick. And I think most of the time you end up picking, you're out there to get the photos. So you kind of pick the photos.
Right. But would you be able to go further and faster?
I think there's an argument that you can. I think it's a little less tangible to take that risk, but this may be something we'll have to talk
It's
about
going to be
more.
an ongoing discussion, I think, and we may have some ideas. And honestly, if you guys have some ideas, you should leave some comments.
Yeah, for sure.
But we should wrap up for today. It's been a long one.
It has been.
And, so if you guys do have any comments, questions, or whatever, please, if you're listening via podcast, you could either hop onto YouTube and leave a comment on the corresponding video, or, you could reach out to us on Instagram at SummitBid, something of that nature. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, then just go ahead and just comment right down below.
Indeed.
Super easy. And so thanks so much for listening. And
and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Bye.